So here's the thing. Video games are a massive industry. I mean, obviously, right? While not everyone is a totally cool, epic gamer who plays 10 hours of World of Warcraft every day, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't played a video game before. It's a global market with a user base in the billions. Even more surprising given the fact that there's only 3 console manufacturers out there. I mean, sure, a large chunk of those people do prefer to play games on computers over consoles, but still, with such a lucrative market out there and only 3 competitors, it kind of makes sense on paper, if you have the ability to throw your hat into the ring and try and get yourself a piece of that pie. Well, here's the problem with that. It almost never works. The last time a new company successfully entered the console market was Microsoft back in 2001. It's been over 25 years, and despite numerous attempts, no company has been able to actually make a successful console outside of the big 3, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, since. If fucking Google can't even make it work, what makes you think you can? The main problem with doing something like this is, why would people bother? Video game consoles are expensive, man. Hell, they're getting more expensive now with AI taking up all the RAM. When people make a choice like this, it has to be something that they're willing to commit to for years. So you really have to give them a good reason to switch to your console, which is a bit hard to do. The big 3 have a lot of brand loyalty, especially Nintendo. And while exclusives are a way to get new eyes on your console, most major game development studios aren't going to want to make exclusive games for an untested platform. And these are just some of the hurdles that you have to overcome if you want to make a games console. That hasn't stopped people from trying. Ouya, Stadia, Atari VCS, all stories of companies trying to make a new console and failing miserably. However, while these stories are well known and pretty cut and dry, there is one console out there with a tale so deep, with so many layers to it that most people don't even know. I think it absolutely takes the case for being the most disastrous attempt at a console launch. Because for all of Stadia's faults, at least it actually released. The Intellivision Amico is a console that was supposed to come out in 2020, meant to mark the grand return of the Intellivision consoles. However, this whole situation would quickly become an absolute mess, with horrible mismanagement, terrible planning, and incredible online backlash. Almost all of which is due to the man at the center of this whole thing, Tommy Tallarico. A somewhat controversial name, Tommy, regardless of what you think of his exaggerations, is definitely a video game fanatic. The guy worked in the industry for years, though it's worth noting that the number of games he's worked on is heavily debated, and even started a whole series of concerts around video game music. So how did this guy, who was mostly respected at the time, end up going on massive supervillain rants toward a couple of YouTubers? And how did this simple console cause so many headaches and even a lawsuit? Well, sit back and relax as I tell you the tale of the Intellivision Amico. Before we get into the story, I think it's important that we do a little bit of a history lesson to set the stage. You need to know what an Intellivision is to truly appreciate how wild this story gets. I'll try and keep it brief. So, let's take a trip back to 1977. It's 1977 now, fuck you. The Atari VCS, later renamed to the Atari 2600, while not the first home video game console, was the first to do it right. Who gives a shit about the Fairchild F? This thing's got combat! Woo! While definitely antiquated, for its time, this thing was cutting edge and very successful, selling 30 million units over its initial lifespan, starting the first video game boom. Other companies looked at this unprecedented success and decided to try and cash in themselves, one of them being toy manufacturer Mattel. And in 1979, they released the Intellivision, short for Intelligent Television. Man, names really did used to be a lot simpler back then. Nowadays, we'd call it the Glorp or something. Intellivision boasted slightly higher specs than the Atari 2600, and they would use this often in their advertising. What the hell, they even did the whole 2 TVs thing over a decade before Sega did. All this advertising worked out, as the Intellivision would end up selling 3 million units. Sure, it was 10 times less than Atari, but it was still the second best-selling console of its era. Its most notable feature was its unique controller, which had a dial with a number pad similar to a phone of the era. Sure, this is a bit odd nowadays, but you gotta remember that video games were very new at the time, and everyone was just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what stuck. Second place was apparently good enough, as Mattel started planning a successor console, however, decided not to go forward with it after the 1983 video game crash. Basically, due to a variety of factors like an overstuffed market and lack of quality control, every American just decided, fuck it, video games suck now, we're not buying them anymore. And since America was the largest purchaser of video games at the time, the entire market value plummeted. So in 1984, Terrence Valesky, a former higher-up at Mattel, purchased the rights to Intellivision and proceeded to do absolutely nothing with the IP. He then sold the rights to Keith Robinson, who started a company called Intellivision Productions, who only existed to port old Intellivision games to every console imaginable. Flash forward to the 2010s. We were in the middle of a retro gaming revival due to the 1980s nostalgia frenzy that we're only now starting to get out of. Retro games were everywhere, and Atari decided to capitalize. In 2017, they announced the Atari VCS, a grand return to the console market for Atari, who had been absent from it since the Jaguar back in 1993. I refuse to believe that what happened next is a coincidence. This was pretty big news when it first broke, so, of course, if Atari's coming back, why shouldn't its original rival? In 2017, after the death of Keith Robinson, video game composer Tommy Tallarico would end up purchasing a majority stake in the Intellivision Productions company, making himself its CEO. And finally, in 2018, they would announce the Amico with a less than stellar video. I won't play the whole thing, but just by watching it, you can tell that the console is in very early development. All they have is concept art, which proudly shows off things like how it will have USB ports. Cool, though obviously the most important part is the controller. Each console comes bundled with 2. This one would still have the dial, but instead of a number pad, it would be a screen. Get it? Because the old one looked like an old phone, this one looks like a modern phone. Don't worry guys, I promise this won't just be the Wii U all over again. In fact, no, it's much worse than that. Remember this though, the whole screen thing will come back in a big way later on, so just keep it in the back of your mind throughout the rest of this video, alright? All that being said, I think the best part is the game section, where they just show off a list of old school Intellivision box art, like that's supposed to mean something. Also, a sizable amount of this announcement is just things like, there will be no DLC, or all games will be exclusive. Other claims would be that every game would cost a maximum of $10, and that the console would release in October of 2020. It was an interesting reveal, to say the least. Opinions were, let's call it mixed. Some people were excited, but many more were not. At all. A few months after this, Tommy would end up making a thread on the Atari Age forums, a website for fans of video games from the late 70s to early 80s. The first post of this thread, written by Tommy himself, reads in part, "The people who know me personally, or who have met me at conventions over my 30-year video game career, know my passion for Intellivision. If you are a lifelong Intellivision fan like myself, ... please know that the brand is in good hands. I'm hoping that I can answer as many questions as I can, so please feel free to ask away. Obviously, there will be a lot I'm unable to discuss, or my marketing and PR folks would kill me, but I'll try to answer the best I can." This thread would end up being, according to the archive, 1,422 pages long. Why do I need to use an archive? Well, in November of 2021, the entire thread was deleted by the website's administrators. Why? Well, let's get into that. Like I said, not everyone was super into the console from the start. Pat the NES punk, real name Patrick Contry, was a YouTuber who focused on reviewing retro video games. Nowadays, he hosts the CU podcast with his co-host Ian Ferguson, and these two would end up being Tommy's arch nemesis. Because there's two of them. Pat and Ian were very critical of the Amico from that first reveal.
I feel like the intent is more genuine behind this. The
intent's genuine, but that's not going to work for people to buy.
It doesn't. Yeah.
You might as well just sell nostalgia like the Atari box.
It really doesn't matter what anyone's intent is with these. There's no. After we've seen so many of them, there's no. It's not. I don't know.
There's no appeal to it.
Now, like I said, these opinions weren't exclusive to just these two. But Pat and Ian were decently popular figures, especially in the retro gaming scene, so this carried a bit more weight coming from them as opposed to a random no-name in a Reddit thread. And seeing how Tommy was very active in the Atari Age forums at the time, it wasn't long before these podcast clips made their way towards him and he got to hear what they had to say. Now, if there is an overarching theme in all of these videos on internet weirdos that I've done, it's that people need to learn when to shut up. Violently responding to criticism, be it valid or invalid, never makes you look good. If it's invalid and just people talking shit, it makes you look like an insecure, easy target for trolling. And if it is valid criticism, well, now you're just an asshole. Now, random people on Tumblr or YouTube, sure, it's still dumb of them to do it, but it's still at least understandable that they might not know how to handle things like this. They're pretty much just normal people that got thrown into a spotlight. But Tommy is an industry professional. He'd been working in the video game scene since the 90s, so surely, he would have to know how to properly act as a public figure, especially as the CEO of this company, right? My response to Pat is this, because he reads here constantly. Ha 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 ha! Nice dodge. Let's get real, kid. You guys are just too lazy and unprepared to handle an interview with me. I'd waste you in every lame attempt at trying to make your idiotic points. As if I need your negative platform to sell Amico. Besides, you said we couldn't sell more than 5,000 units. Pretty funny considering we sold 2,600 in 5 hours. How's that prediction working out for you? Let's face it, you and your partner just don't want to look foolish in front of the people you continue to lie to. Funny how a slew of YouTubers, a lot bigger than you, have chimed in as well to call you out on your laziness and biased lies. Guess this is all par for the course with you guys, lying about me and the product just so you can make $10 more a week on your channel, and you call others shills. Get over yourself. Tell you what, Chuckles, let's do a live streamed event on both our YouTube channels, and we'll get a bunch of other big YouTubers to stream it live as well. All at the same time, when everyone will donate all the monetized money to the Child's Play charity. Gauntlet thrown, fellas. Now hurry on back to your safe space surrounded by your stuffed animals so you can sling your arrows instead of standing up for yourselves and facing me. Cowards! God damn it, Tommy. I did most of that in one take, by the way. Oy. This is not an isolated incident, by the way. There are dozens of these rants, sprinkled all throughout the thread on Atari Age. I won't read them all, but some quotes I'd like to highlight include, "They are literally so unintelligent that they are not self-aware enough to know how dumb they are." Wonderful sentence structure there. "Keep in mind, idiots like Pat, the self-proclaimed retro expert, bragged with glee that the Amico would never be sold at retail. He also said that we would be lucky if we sold 5,000 units during the lifespan of the product. Yet, here we are with zero advertising dollars spent, and for all intents and purposes, a new company that has come out of nowhere, which will now be in the same area and shelves that Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo are in." We're just gonna put a pin in that one for later because it's going to become very funny pretty soon. And finally, probably my favorite rant Tommy went on in this entire thread, Agreed. I always appreciated and liked our back and forth, as you were also respectful in giving your opinions and concerns. And yes, there's another word for folks who go out of their way to pick on the underdogs. It's called a bully. Their goal isn't to give concerns and criticisms, it's to make fun of something and discriminate against something that is different or they don't understand. Another word for that is racist. They are gaming racists. There, I said it. Smiley face emoji. Like, what do I even say to something like that? Tommy really fucking hates these two so bad for saying his console looks stupid, he's willing to make huge reaches like that just to have an excuse to call them racist. It's absurd. So why did the Atari Age admins eventually delete this thread? This is why. Tommy just couldn't shut the fuck up. And everyone else on the thread was just sucking his dick the entire time, praising every word that he has to say, or making fan shirts for a game that doesn't exist yet, or promoting Amico YouTube channels. How the fuck do you make a YouTube channel for a video game console you can't play yet? This whole thread was just a cult of personality centered on Tommy, with people loving everything he has to say, and lashing out at anyone who dares criticize Tommy and the second coming of the Intellivision. Remember, all this sycophancy was for a console that hadn't released yet. This thread would be embarrassing if it was based on, like, the Switch or something, but no! These guys are this obsessed with something just because one guy kept hyping it up. Tommy would constantly go on talking about how cutting edge this was, how it was gonna go toe-to-toe with the Switch or PS5, and everyone just bought it for some reason, because I guess he was a famous guy, and hey look, he's noticing us. He would also, very frequently, bring up the Atari VCS, furthering my belief that the only reason this console even got started was to capitalize on that old rivalry. It'd be like if Sega made a new console and tried to reignite the rivalry between them and Nintendo, except those were two industry giants that changed the face of video games forever, and this was a company that hadn't released a video game console since the 90s, and Intellivision. Now maybe I'm just being a fool here. After all, in 2020, we finally got some gameplay footage released. Yes, Tommy decided to finally bless the world with gameplay footage, showing us content that can only be achieved on the Amico. This video is surreal, man. You got this Flash game that looks like something a kid would make on Armor Games back in 2014, paired with this hype-ass music and some of the worst gameplay I've seen for such a simple concept. Just shoot the rock, dude! It's not that hard! Actually, I take that back. The Flash Kid would have been able to make sure that the asteroids fall from the sky instead of just popping in at the top of the screen. Oh, Strongman, are you really gonna make fun of a game that isn't finished yet? Yeah. Look, even if those minor problems were resolved, can we at least agree that this reveal was incredibly lame? Like, wow, asteroids! Is this what's supposed to be selling people on your console? So first impressions weren't too good. Again. But they'll just iron out the kinks later. After all, they had a whole presentation for E3 2021. Wait, what? I thought the console was supposed to come out in 2020. Oh, yeah! It's alright, I'm not gonna give them shit for that. No one could have predicted COVID. I'm sure this will be the only delay for this console. Still, the 2021 presentation didn't help much. Firstly, it's very dry. It's not a presentation like how you would expect on like a stage. It's a video that Tommy shot in a room meant to be handed out to investors at E3, and then they also uploaded it to YouTube just to get people excited for it. He just repeats everything that he said before, how there will be no DLC, all games will be exclusive and $10, and so on and so forth. And man, the games ain't looking too much better than last time. It just all looks so boring. Like, okay, the main question that Tommy has to answer in this presentation is why somebody would choose to purchase an Amico instead of a Switch, since they're clearly both targeting that family audience. Especially since the Amico was $250. For context, the Switch started off at $300. So why, Tommy, would your average customer purchase an Amico instead of saving up just a little bit more and buying the biggest fucking console that was out at the time? Oh, because the games are less expensive. Not really. Like, yeah, a lot of the first-party AAA games for Switch are gonna be $60, obviously, but there's a lot more to the console's library than that. For one thing, by 2021, the Nintendo Switch eShop had plenty of free-to-play games. Now, I understand that those don't often have the best reputation, but, I mean, one of them was Fortnite, and that's one of the biggest games of all time, so, yeah, there you go. That's probably worth the console alone for a 12-year-old. And things get worse for them when you start looking at the games that actually cost money. Because there are plenty of inexpensive games on the eShop that are well worth your time. I remember when I first got my Switch, one of the first games I got for it was a little game called Pocket Rumble. It was an indie fighting game that was like $10, the same price as an Amico game, by the way, but it was very fast-paced and simple and fun. And you have to admit, it looks better than anything the Amico was showing off, that's for sure. And if you're willing to go just a little bit outside of that $10 range, the entire argument falls apart. I got Sonic Forces back in 2018 for $15. And sure, that game is terrible, I stand by it's the worst Sonic game, but it still blows anything the Amico has out of the water. So you stack all of that together, and all the Amico had to show in response was Shark Shark. By this point, the response from people who weren't already in the Amico cult was just confusion.
Because it recognizes that it's my controller, we can now play all of my games that I own on your system at your house. As long as my...
Wow, that's so convenient. That's literally almost as convenient as just bringing a Switch with you. So you see now, this is just trying to sell you this weird console on the exact same, like, features that the Switch has. I mean, okay, fine, maybe you can't bring a single Joy-Con over to somebody's house and, like, transfer your games or whatever, but you could just bring the Switch, whatever. It's like a pound, whatever, just bring the fucking Switch.
Controller is there.
You don't need this weird, stupid device.
Like, why did they think this would work? Were they just delusional enough to think they actually had something here? Or was this just some elaborate scam? The accusations of being a scam were not helped when people found out that this thing was crowdfunded. Multiple times. The first was back in 2020 on a website called Fig, which specialized in crowdfunding for video games. We had to dig around for a while, but eventually we found documents from Fig showing that this first crowdfunding campaign raised $13 million. Then, in early 2021, Fig got bought out by a company called Republic, rebranded to Republic, and they decided to host another crowdfunding campaign, this time raising $11 million. They also claim on that Republic crowdfunding page that they have already received $25 million in pre-orders. I don't believe that, but let's keep working under the assumption that it's true. That means, according to publicly released information, the Amico raised $49 million before this E3 presentation, which again was just a video of Tommy talking and occasional footage of games that looked like mobile slop. For context, the Atari VCS raised $3 million from a single Indiegogo campaign. Is it any wonder why people thought this was a scam? Now, the quality of these games were so poor, and its presentation so baffling, that people started doing some serious digging into what was going on with the Amico. And this is where things really fall off the tracks. In June of 2021, Sam Makovic, a writer for the website Ars Technica, would start digging into the Amico's developer portal. For the unaware, a dev portal is basically a big Google Doc full of information about the console so that developers are aware of what they're working with ahead of time. You don't want to start making a game only to realize that it's too much for the console to handle. And how much could the console handle? Not much. The Intellivision developer portal includes precise specs for various system elements in order to help game makers begin building Amico software before they receive official dev kits. Before listing all of its specs, Intellivision's own comparison makes the point more simply. We've found that the ZTE Z-Max Pro 7981, Snapdragon 617, Andreo 405 is a good benchmark test that runs just a little slower than the Amico hardware. This model of ZTE smartphone debuted in 2016 at a budget price point of $100. The Amico, in 2021, is basically equal in power to a 2016 budget smartphone. Holy shit! Also, they blatantly stole models and assets from other games, including World of Tanks, a game that is known for its very precise tank modeling. This was bad. Really bad. So bad that Tommy started to screech at Sam on Twitter and threaten legal action. Ars Tech journalist Sam Red just illegally posted a bunch of confidential information about Intellivision in his ridiculous misinformation article. The private info had not for public use and confidential all over it. Unfortunately, legal action will need to be taken. Some genius who thinks using stick photos are against the law. Some genius who thinks using stock photos is against the law. He made the same tweet twice. You can tell this guy was fuming. He was seeing red. But you see, here's the problem. No, Sam didn't, because none of this information was private. As Sam said at the very start of this article, the Intellivision developer portal was recently publicly available online. No password needed, for long enough to have the details saved at archive.org earlier this month, which we have reviewed. Sources with knowledge about Amico have confirmed to Ars Technica that the leaked specs we've seen were legitimate. Tommy, you can't sue someone for talking about something you didn't keep private, you idiot! This whole thing looked really bad on Tommy's part. Obviously. Accusations of scammery were being thrown left and right. Pat and Ian never had more allies than they did at this moment, and the Amico's reputation was in the pits. And this is when a lot of weird stuff started happening around Tommy. He just straight up lied about how he was going to be on the Ellen show. Like, that was never going to happen. I don't know what he was expecting there. But outside of that, Tommy just kind of sunk into the darkness and just kept working on the Amico in private. And then 2021 came and went, with the console never releasing. And then the months went on in 2022 with no mention of a release date. And then the lawsuit happened. On December 12, 2022, Amur Equipment Finances Incorporated would file a lawsuit against Intellivision Entertainment. Amur is a financing company, as the name would suggest, that specifically gives people money so that they can purchase equipment that otherwise might be too expensive for a startup. Basically, they give you money so you can buy, like, computers and printers and shit like that, and then you gotta pay them back later. Intellivision got $130,000 back in February of 2021 for office supplies and furnitures. And according to the lawsuit, defendant agreed to pay plaintiff $3,015.83 for 60 months, together with the applicable fees and taxes. By my math, that's somewhere around $200,000. Wait a second, why would they need office space in 2021? Wasn't the console ready for mass production in 2020? Why, right you are, Rascal. That's a very good point. You see, in early 2021, Intellivision would hold an open house in its Los Angeles office that would allow people to tour the offices and try the console out. They did the same thing in late 2021 in Salt Lake City, Utah. So what that means, dear viewer and Rascal, is that Tommy and friends took out a $130,000 loan that would end up costing them $200,000 so that they could LARP in some offices for a couple of days while these tours take place. I don't know about the LA tour, But they did post a video going over their Salt Lake City office, and by God, this thing is fake as fuck. Tommy just walks into this room and talks to the money man, who gives no details on what he actually does. And he walks out and runs into these fine gents who apparently work in logistics, where they claim to have 40,000 game products in the US and 10K in Poland.
We just got in a whole bunch of our physical game products, yeah. What, how many of them are over there?
40,000 here now in the U.S.
40,000 in the US.
And 10 left back in Poland.
10,000 back in Europe.
He then goes over to this guy, Nick, says this.
People remember Nick.
Yep, everywhere.
Nick's everywhere. He just keeps following us around. We don't know what's going on. But Nick's been to the Salt Lake office a bunch of times. Of course, works out of Irvine. But yeah, kind of helped to put this whole thing together with Kevin.
And just immediately goes this guy, Kevin, who is the Vice President of Customer Experience, which is the most fake Nepo baby title I can possibly think of. Then we meet the single customer support agent named Brittany, and then he walks all the way over here past all of these empty desks and meets 4 QA testers. Also, as you may have noticed, no one here is actually using any of the computers. They're all on laptops. Hell, most of the computers aren't even hooked up to the stands. Now, assuming that all of this is real, why? Why do you need an office in Utah for this stuff? Especially one as empty as this. This is not a functioning office. There's just no way. Also, at one point, Tommy said this.
We're doing everything now. We have 2 offices in Europe, in Germany.
Excuse me? Two offices in Germany? Why would you need that? Why would a company, especially of your size, have multiple overseas offices? Hell, at one point, he even tried to claim he had an office in Dubai. So, we got an office in California, an office in Utah, 2 in Germany, and 1 in Dubai. Why in God's name does the Amico need that, Tommy? I'll tell you why. Investors. They needed money, bad, so they needed to look like a big company that people should invest in. Because remember, the whole reason that any of this even got out was because they couldn't pay back their rented office supplies. After the console supposedly raised $50 million, by the way, this lawsuit would be the end of the Intellivision Amico. They just flat out did not have the money to pay them back. Even after repossessing a whole bunch of stuff, they were still $100,000 in debt to Amur. And as was revealed through this whole mess, the console still hadn't gone into any level of production. All they had to show for all of this, by our count, was 5 prototypes. That's it. And then to make things even worse, because of this whole mess, it got out just how much debt Intellivision had. In another article by Ars Technica, it was revealed, according to the company, long-term debt is up to $7.2 million and short-term debt has reached $1.2 million. Over $8 million of debt for a company that had literally nothing to show for it. These guys were screwed until last minute. Atari, of all companies, swooped in and made an offer to Intellivision. In exchange for $3 million, Atari wanted the entire Intellivision brand, including a license to all of their retro games. Intellivision had no choice but to agree. So basically, Atari bought the entire company for $3 million, except for the Amico. Amico, as a company, is still around, actually. At least their website is. But not with Tommy. After this whole mess, he stepped down as CEO, walked away from the company, and most of the internet, frankly, he still is laying low to this day. Now, you may have noticed, that money was not enough to cover all of their debts. Not even close. Yep, the money that they got was basically just to settle their lawsuit and cover those short-term debts. That's it. That's all that they had. The company is still racked with debt and still has no money or product. Now all this begs a very important question. What the fuck happened to all of the money? Well, I have a theory. Firstly, throw out that pre-order number. There is no way they made $25 million off pre-orders. That would require 100,000 pre-orders, and given the console's muddy reputation, I just don't believe that at all. Hell, I don't even feel comfortable halving it. Make it like 2.5 million, then I might believe it. Let's also remember that the first crowdfunding campaign was in 2020, which likely is when they wanted to go into full production. So they had about $15 million in 2020. We actually do have evidence of not the console, but the games, or more accurately, the boxes for the games going into production. In mid-2021, they showed footage of the game boxes on a production line, so clearly there was some level of actual manufacturing happening here, which I think comfortably throws out the idea that this was a scam from the start. They clearly wanted to make something. Now, do you remember way back when I told you to keep in mind the fact that the controllers all had to have screens built into them? Well, here's where we're bringing that back up. Now, yes, screens aren't that expensive, but they're a hell of a lot more expensive than your average controller, which is probably why, despite the console's low specs, it had to be priced at nearly the same cost as a Switch. You're basically buying two, admittedly far cheaper Switches with each console, and those costs are gonna start adding up. And while a big company like Nintendo would have the money to get something like that mass-produced, Intellivision likely didn't. Now, maybe if they actually thought through the design of the console, this would have been noticed and prevented, but I am 100% convinced that this thing was rushed out the door to hop on the bandwagon of the Atari VCS. The thought process probably started and stopped with, "Oh, it looked like an old phone, so let's make it look like a modern phone." Now, here's something interesting we found while looking into the agreement with Fig. Remember Fig, the crowdfunding campaign that Intellivision first partnered with? Well, put simply, Tommy got swindled, as in exchange for Fig not only having the Amico on their website, but also putting together these documents to email out to potential investors, Intellivision would have to pay Fig $45 per console sold. I got the math wrong at first, and it's too late to re-record all of this, but, I mean, can you blame me? Look at this fucking mess. So, factor in their expensive-ass controllers, and the locked $45 loss for every console sold, I think it's possible that they just didn't have the money they needed to get mass-produced and not go bankrupt. So they had that second campaign, which, importantly, did not reach its goal. Their goal was $15 million, they only raised $11 million. And all of that just so happens to line up with that massive push from Intellivision to get the name out there. The E3 presentations, the open houses, hell, there's a whole load of events I just haven't covered, like one, the Crayola experience, ooh. I have to assume that all of these events were trying to catch the eye of some angel investor that would pull them out of this hole that they were in, while continuing to dig the hole deeper because they kept spending money on these events. They wanted to look like they were these big companies with offices all over the world that were going to be on hit shows like Ellen that you could make a lot of money with if you just paid to have the consoles get made, all at the hands of a CEO that makes Michael Scott look like a genius with a master's in business. And then it all came crashing down with the lawsuit, fully exposing just how much they spent with money they didn't have. Which is probably why Tommy stepped down. He realized that the jig was up. They're not getting out of this, so he might as well just pass the buck on to some other poor schmuck and wash his hands of the whole thing. Like I said, Amico still exists as a company, and in order to try and raise some money, they actually released a couple of their games on Steam. They did not sell well at all. Evel Knievel had a max of 4 players, and Finnegan Fox sold under 1,000 copies. So unless Cornhole is the hottest game on Switch right now, I don't think they're making much progress on chipping away at the remaining $6 million of debt. Oh, and by the way, just to rub a little salt in the wound, you can buy an Intellivision console from Atari right now. It's called the Intellivision Sprint, and it's basically just an NES Classic for Intellivision. I genuinely considered buying it as a prop for this video, but It's too much for a prop that I'd only ever use once and probably never actually play. But that really does serve as a poetic fuck you to these guys, doesn't it? The main reason why this console even exists was purely to ride on the old rivalry between these two. And not only did the VCS actually come out, as seen by this footage by my pal Yugby, who's been helping me with research in these past few videos, but they also ended up literally owning the competition. Was the Intellivision Amico doomed from the start? Yeah, probably. It was a poorly thought out console that existed purely to ape off of another console that didn't even sell well to begin with. Yeah, the VCS was a massive flop and a huge disaster behind the scenes, which honestly just makes it even funnier that Intellivision was trying to bank off it. Honestly though, at least Atari is a well-known name. They've been an active part of the gaming landscape since the 70s. Even if the company was traded back and forth a few times over the years, its name was always there, and as such it retained some level of relevance. Intellivision? Who gives a fuck about the Intellivision? It had one console back in the late 70s that died in 1983 and hadn't been relevant for almost 40 years by the time the console was supposed to release. So if Atari coming back to consoles couldn't sell more than 10,000 units, what hope did the Intellivision have? Of course, they couldn't have known that at the time, but it doesn't change the fact that they clearly rushed this thing out, or tried to rush it out, which led to them making bad deals and stupid mistakes because they were desperate to get this thing out to save face somehow, especially since their CEO had spent years hyping this thing up and shit-talking anyone who dared criticize them. But as the years went on and on, eventually they were forced to just face the truth. It never would have worked. Only for them to be immediately outdone by a company that actually knows what they're doing. Well, kinda. The VCS was still a failure, but hey, they got the Intellivision right. That's what matters. Based on the quality of the games we got to see, I don't think this is some big loss. This thing would have been panned as a complete waste of money if it actually did manage to come out. But I can say this. While the console and games may have sucked, Intellivision did manage to produce one thing of quality. That being this crazy-ass story. I'm Sir Strongman, and I want to thank each and every one of you for getting me to 10,000 subscribers. Holy shit. Yeah, I didn't expect that at all. Yeah, this is kind of insane, actually. This part's unscripted, just so we're clear. I'm just saying from the heart at this point. Thank you all for subscribing. I can't believe that 10,000 people, over 10,000 people now actually, have seen this face and heard this voice say the things that come from this mind and decided, you know what? I want to see more from this guy. So thank you genuinely for all that. It really feels like a hidden milestone here. This is not the 10K sub special, by the way. Let me just make that clear. I want to kind of make it more of an event. I have two things planned. One of them being a post that's going to come up on the community tab at the same time this video comes out. It's going to be looking for questions for a Q&A, and I will be answering anything. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be answering them correctly, but you can ask me anything from the video production to math equation to how to make grilled cheese. I don't know. Just give me whatever the fuck you got. I'll answer it. That'll be a video that comes out sometime in the future. The next video that's going to be the actual 10K sub special is going to be a video on the, let's call it far right furry convention, free-for-all, and the just pages of lore that there is for them. They're linked to Joe Exotic somehow. I'm not kidding. It's insane, but also feels like a good story since I got my start with the whole convention video series, so yeah, that seems like a good thing to do for 10K subs. And then after that, we'll move on to see if we can get to 50K. Once again, thank you very much for all of that. It's a little crazy to think that, you know, I made it. If you asked me 6 months ago how long it'd take me to get to 10K, I wouldn't have an answer because I wouldn't know. I wouldn't think it would be, you know, now. But yeah, this is, thank you. I guess the only thing left to say is, I'm Sir Strongman, and that was the thing.